Hello, dear sister in Christ. My name is Pat Domangue. I'm founder of On Fire Ministries, Bible study author, and teacher. Welcome to her podcast where we help women find healing and encouragement for real life. So today I am so excited to have the honor of speaking with my friend and sister in Christ, Patricia Cameron, who is also the author of Grief Unwrapped, Discovering Joy in a Season of Sorrow. And Patricia and I go all the way back to junior high, and we've known each other for a long time. And I know that you are going to be so blessed to hear from her and hear the message of healing and encouragement in real life that she has for you. So Patricia, welcome to her podcast. And thank you for being with us and sharing some of your story and experience with grief so that other women can also find hope and joy, even when grief grips their heart.
Thank you, Pat. I am honored to be here and glad our paths have crossed again. Many years since high school or junior high school, right?
Yeah. Yes, a lot. Yeah, it's kind of neat how God does that. He just weaves your paths back and forth because ours have been like that throughout the years, just in and out. But it is good to be back together again, especially that we get to do something in ministry together is really special.
Absolutely.
Well, for the past 5 months, one of the things that I've focused on in her podcast is I've been doing a How to Study the Bible series. But I just felt like the Lord wanted me to take a sidestep from that. I don't know if it's for longer than this Christmas season, but I felt like He was really prompting me to something different. So right after I finished the last podcast that I did, I started sensing God nudging me to address grief and to do it during the Christmas season. And I absolutely love Christmas, but I've also experienced some of the most agonizing times because of grief during Christmas. So, of course, Jesus just started nudging me toward this, and it was in the middle of the night, which is so normal for He and I, which I'm always like, I would much rather have Him speak to me than I would sleep anyway. So I'm good with that. So I think this is just all kind of started with knowing several situations of other people who are going through grief right now and thinking about how painful the holiday season would be for them. And then kind of silly, but even on this more minimal scale, as the holidays approach this year, the change in my life with two of my adult children living several hours away from me, and some are coming home for one holiday and not for another, and one not getting to come home at all. And so we're traveling there. And so what's happened is just our traditional way of doing Thanksgiving and Christmas throughout our lifetime really has changed. And it kind of made me a little sad. So one night I was just kind of laying in bed feeling a little bit tender over that. And I started thinking about how the holidays can be so extremely difficult, I should say, in different seasons of life. I remembered when my daddy died 35 years ago and the agony that I felt through Thanksgiving and Christmas. And then I thought about the terrible season that our family went through when one of my daughters went through a dark place and she wasn't with us during the holidays. And, in both of those seasons, the joy that I normally felt during Thanksgiving and Christmas just wasn't there. But instead, this deep, heart hurting pain that threatened to consume all forms of potential happiness. So the reality is pain from separation through death or other circumstances can really affect our holidays. And I couldn't help but think of you, Patricia, knowing all of what you've faced, and now that you're sharing your journey and you're ministering to others out of your journey through your book, The Grief Unwrapped, Discovering Joy in a Season of Sorrow, and even in your speaking ministry. One of the things I thought was funny, though, when we talked about the podcast, you were pretty quick to say, now, I am not an expert. I'm not a grief counselor or anything like that. But, I would just say, that's only from a professional sense. Your real life experiences have definitely equipped you to speak a word of healing and encouragement to others who might be facing some level of grief. And I would love it if you would start by just sharing your story with our listeners, because I think they might need to hear that.
That's right, Pat. Even though Christmas season can be fun with lots of things to do, many find it difficult, and even that's when depression sets in a lot of times. So I am no stranger to grief. I mentioned that, but God has seen me through so much. Tragedy in my family when my dad suffered a debilitating accident when I was 5. After a 6 months hospital stay and rehab in Boston, he came home with prosthetic legs, and he's been on those what we used to call back in the day artificial legs for 55 years now.
Wow.
I've experienced grief over an unwanted divorce, the devastating loss of my 6-year-old nephew who died at the hands of an abusive stepfather, the loss of a dear friend from cancer, and then multiple miscarriages, and then, of course, the grief when our infant daughter died at birth. But the biggest obstacle was my husband's sudden collapse and death 5 days later in what they called an electric event. So after several days of tests, we found that he had had too much oxygen to the brain. So nothing prepared me for the ache in my heart as I said goodbye. It seemed at that time the joy had been sucked right out of my life.
Yeah.
But through that time, I learned that times of pain test our beliefs. I had to decide if what I knew in my head was what I believed in my heart. I had to trust God was who he said he was, and that what he said was true. I remember that pivotal day. I told God I would praise him no matter what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
then,
such a
of
big
course, the
deal.
worst did happen.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's such a big deal that to praise in the middle of the pain, because it is, there's so much power in that. Finding healing and encouragement for real life through the Bible is what we've always been about and what I want to do in her podcast. And so when I was thinking about the grief, I couldn't help but think about the story of Lazarus in John 11, kind of a familiar story to many of us, but Lazarus was dead. And when his sister Mary fell down mourning at Jesus' feet, we see that Jesus groaned in the spirit and was troubled. And then he wept. And so, of course, I am a original language studier. I love studying that original language. So when I studied the original Greek language of the phrase groaned in the spirit, I learned that in Greek, groaned not only expressed grief, but I also learned that it expressed anger and indignation against someone, as in blaming or making a charge against someone. So interestingly, the Greek word for groaned is a compound word. And if we separate the two words, we would see the first part of the word to mean on account of, and the second part of the word to mean roar or storm with anger. So when I recognized this, I saw that this was Jesus' anger and indignation was directed at someone, and someone had caused this pain to those that he loved and treasured, and that someone stirred a storm of anger in his spirit. So the next Greek term that I want us to see is the term troubled. John 11:33 says he groaned in the spirit and he was troubled. So the word troubled means to stir up, to agitate, or trouble with various emotions. And the Greek term is in the passive voice, and passive voice in Greek refers to things that we do to ourselves. So in other words, Jesus stirred up and troubled himself with emotions in response to seeing the grief and pain of those that he loved and that they were facing, that pain that they were facing. So at some point, I heard a teacher say that Jesus wasn't just weeping for Lazarus and Mary and Martha because they were his friends, but for every one of us throughout the generations who would face the pain of death, who would face the pain of losing someone that they love. You know, death was never God's plan, but it was the result of sin and the evil one who tempted and deceived Eve so long ago. And I believe that that Greek language shows us that Jesus was angry and indignant at death and at the evil one who initially caused the fall of mankind into sin. He couldn't stand to see us experience the pain of death that we were not created to experience. So Jesus did what only Jesus could do. He won the victory over death and suffering, and he promised us that one day he would wipe away every tear from our eyes. And in the meantime, God comforts us. So, Patricia, could you share how you experienced Jesus' comfort during some of those seasons of grief?
Of course. Sadness is part of life, and grief can pop up without a moment's notice. It's that sudden catch in your breath or hollow feeling in your stomach. I remember that feeling from many years ago driving past an apartment complex of my friend who passed away from cancer.
Mm.
I remember the Christmas when I realized my youngest son had had more Christmases without his dad than he had had with him. And that made my soul weary all over again.
Yeah.
As I've cried out to God, he has always met me there. His word comforted me. He has showered mercy and grace on me. He's proven he is good over and over again. He is faithful and he will remain faithful. He's at the beginning of my story and he will be with me until my
Mm.
final days. I may not be grateful for every struggle or loss, but I can be grateful that God reigns. I can be grateful that he was there to sustain me and he sustains me still. I'm grateful for every lesson I've learned along the way and am still learning. I am grateful that God showed me I could have joy. He put people in my life, scriptures in my path, and songs in my heart that have encouraged me and lifted me from a deep darkness that was my life for a time. When I found out that our baby wouldn't live, the season of waiting on my due date to arrive nearly broke us. But
Mm.
God carried us through that time with a community of friends who surrounded us with love and encouragement. He gave us the strength to pick ourselves up and even embrace life again. He spoke peace into our sorrow, and we began to hope again.
Mm. One of the things that's sticking out to me in both the segments that you've just been talking about this is how you've expressed praise and great goodness, gratitude, I guess I should say. But that's so powerful because you're able to see even beyond the grief and the pain and recognize the strength that I think you get from praise and from being able to be grateful, like you said, maybe not for every single awful thing that you've gone through, but there's always something in the midst of that that you can be grateful for. And specifically, like you said, God's carried you through and he's not going to ever leave you. So I love that you've attested to that because I think that's really important for all of us. Because a lot of times, I think when we get in, maybe not even specifically a season of grief, but even in a bad situation or discouraging circumstances or whatever, a lot of times we let that slide. But there's so much ability for that to pull us out of our pit when we start looking at but what we do have. So I love that. I appreciate you sharing that. One of the things that about both of our experiences reminds us that grief isn't always based on a physical death. We've all heard it said that, and you even mentioned the divorce. I mean, divorce is like a death. And some people say it's worse because the person is still living. And I think any kind of major separation in a relationship with someone that we love causes some kind of degree of grief. And I just wondered if there were any practices that helped you find hope and joy in the midst of grief that someone else might also find beneficial.
I think so. I get that it isn't always due to a physical death. We can grieve the loss of a job, or a dream, or a relationship. I
Yeah.
remember grieving the loss of my first marriage. I did not want it, and it was a terrible blow to me.
Yeah.
But I believe that memories play a large part in our healing journey due to the death of a loved one. Memories can help us process our loss and help us heal. Remembering the good days can help us get through our not so good days. In our family, we talked about my husband often and still do. We remember the things he said. We talk about what he would have thought about something we were doing. My boys have even tried to convince me that he gave them a sip of beer one time at a restaurant. I still don't believe them.
How funny.
I mean, they are adamant that he did, but we also need to remember God's blessing during our time of grief. I think that's important. Our memories inspire us to focus on the good in our lives. When we're
Mhm.
feeling down or lost or depressed about anything, I think it's healing to remember the times when God's presence was with us. And I think we can connect with our loved ones emotionally through our memories. And I
Mhm.
encourage people to write them down. The big events, the small things that make you cry, things that make you laugh, things that move you forward. Our lives change forever when a loved one passes away, but memories help us through each milestone and each significant event.
That's so good. That's so good. I hadn't really ever thought about that quite that way, of the healing that memories do have. I recognize it when you say it, but just thinking about when my daddy died 35 years ago. But I mean, I had the best daddy. He was just such an amazing daddy. And so I didn't think I was going to survive, his death, and he had passed away in early November. So my life growing up, daddy had been, we were Christmas junkies together, so Christmas. And I think that's probably part of all this, knowing that and knowing people are grieving right now. Um, I mean, I was just a mess during Christmas because everything was so tied to him. But at the same time, there was so many great memories in Christmas with him. So it was really hard, but at the same time, I will forever treasure the life that I had. Everybody doesn't get that, and I know that. So for me, that is such a blessing to be able to look back and see the gift that God gave me through my daddy. And, this is total side note, but I was just thinking about one of the things that daddy gave me was the ability. And it's such a blessing to have had a daddy that loved me like that, and he would show me unconditional love. It made me be able to accept God's unconditional love as well. And so that's a lot of the reason people will hear me pray Heavenly Daddy, because I can connect with him that way, because of the gift of the daddy that he gave me. So anyway, I love what you shared about memories, because that is not something that's really connected for me, but that's a big deal. I love that.
That's cool.
Well, okay. So back to I kind of got on a rant just thinking about that with my daddy, though. But my oldest daughter is a professional counselor. So, of course, we believe in getting counseling if needed. So, my question for you is, did you go to counseling through any of this? And like when your husband passed away, what about your children? Did you do anything with counseling for them? And if so, what point do you think counseling is the most helpful?
Okay. Well, first of all, I certainly recommend going to counseling. And Grief Share, of course, is another good option.
Okay.
However, I did not because I shouldn't, not because I didn't want to, I should have, but simply because I didn't think I had the time. With three young
Mm.
boys at home, I barely could keep my head above water.
Yeah.
I took my boys to counseling and a couple of family counseling sessions. When any issue that came up, though, the root cause would always go back to the loss of their dad. And so I would say we kind of floundered in the counseling arena. But we have talked about a lot of things over the years, and my boys are doing well. We have been through a lot of turmoil and made a lot of mistakes over the years, but thank God they all seem to be pretty solid, and couldn't be more proud of them.
That's so awesome. Great testimony. Well, so with that, how do you help grieving children when you yourself are going through that deep grief like that?
Yeah, you're touching on some things now, things from my areas of mistakes. I would first say the most important thing is just to cling to Jesus.
Mm.
Listen when they're willing to speak, because I want to know everything, and I would try to drag things out of them, and that didn't work. But I probably overreacted way too much. But some of the things that we did try to do, I tried to be consistent with our routines, keeping up
Mm.
our family traditions, especially Christmas. We have kept every tradition. Matthew and I started having Christmas parties. Well, we both had them separately before we married, and then we had one every year. And so the first year I said, yeah, I want to keep doing the parties. And they said, yes. And so we've kept that up, and this year is our 28th annual Cameron Christmas party.
That's
My
awesome.
husband died about 3 months before Christmas, and we had never decorated our yard with inflatables, but that Christmas, in an effort to bring joy to my boys, I went and
Mm.
bought the biggest teddy bear inflatable I could find.
That's great.
People couldn't believe it, but everyone agreed you got to do what you got to do, And
That's
so
right.
we had so much fun with that bear over the years. We just stopped putting him out a couple of years ago. But I will
Well,
say, when my husband died, I thought there was no way I could do this on my own with 3 young boys at home. But like I said earlier, I've seen them grow and mature, learn to drive, begin dating, working while attending school. And I'm so proud of them, the young men they've become. And with all my mistakes, I wonder how we ever got to this place. But when my husband wasn't by my side during those impactful years as they were growing up, Jesus was. And I can only say that he is the reason we are where we are today.
yeah. That's so good. Well, and just so you know, it doesn't matter if you're in grief or not. You got mistakes if you're parenting. I don't know that it is possible to parent. I know it is not possible to parent without making mistakes, no matter what. So, um, but the good thing is Jesus redeems even those mistakes that we have when we're parenting. So,
Yes.
throughout the years, I've seen a lot of people go through grief, and it looks different for every one person. I mean, one person to the next. And so, what are the commonalities and uniquenesses in how people experience and manage grief that you've seen?
In the last year since my husband passed away, I've known a lot of women who've lost their husbands, and a lot are younger too. And some respond with anger, some internalize their grief, which is really where I land. Some
Mhm.
find comfort in talking about their loved one. Some want to be alone. Some want to be with other people. When I was writing my first book, I met a new friend whose husband had died just 6 months before that. And she told me about a Facebook group of widows she had been following. And she said that some women commenting in that group had been widows for 5 or more years and still couldn't get out of bed except to go to
Wow.
work and come right back home. They were held captive by their sorrow, and in their sadness, they
Mm.
left no room for joy in their lives. And as I mentioned earlier, a moment of grief can sneak up on us. We may be enjoying a day with our family or out shopping or just taking a drive when we're hit
Yeah.
all over again about our loss. And I still have those moments, especially at the holidays, and particularly during special events like high school graduations and Eagle Scout ceremonies.
Yeah.
And that's okay, but I don't want to
Yeah.
stay there. And I think that God has given us the ability to find joy wherever we are, in our memories, in in difficult circumstances,
Yeah.
and even in our pain.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Romans 12:15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. And Hebrews 10:24-25 says, and let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is in the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much more as you see the day approaching. These passages just remind me that the support and ministry of others to us has to also be an important part. And I would say, especially in the body of Christ, because we're the ones who have the hope of Jesus and the hope that his promises in his word will be fulfilled, and that we have that assurance of his word that says in Psalm 34:18, the Lord is near to those who have a broken heart and save such as have a contrite spirit. And then in Psalm 147:3, heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. And then Jesus said in Matthew 5:4, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. So for you personally, how much did other people's support matter for you, and what mattered the most to you when your heart was gripped by grief?
Well, there have been so many incredible people in my life, people who have stood by us, prayed over us, gave
Mm.
financially to us. God has used all of them to bless and minister us. Even an example comes to mind, a guy that I had known him from years before, but had not stayed in touch. But he came by the day of the memorial service and left a business card and told me he wanted to mow our yard and show our boys how to mow um, that season. And he did. He came by and he mowed our grass, and he taught my boys how to mow as well. And that was just such a blessing. And
Yeah,
it probably was a simple thing, but it was just something that spoke to us, and
yeah,
something that was needed as well, because we had not taught our boys
yeah,
how. Matter of fact, my husband had talked about, we were about to do that. But anyway, even so, as we approached the 1 year anniversary of my husband's death, I was very anxious and overwhelmed. I think that first year was just, and most I think will tell you, is the hardest. But depression set in. I felt on the verge of a breakdown. There were so many decisions to make, and it was all up to me to make them. But at that time, I attended a women's retreat led by a couple of churches in the area. It ended on the eve of the anniversary of Matthew's death, so I almost didn't go. But at the
mm,
retreat, I was a blubbering mess.
mm,
But God used that retreat to help me heal. It was I would say, a defining time in my life. It gave me focus and clarity and women who were the hands and feet of Jesus. And also, God gave me perspective that weekend. I realized that everyone has something or will have something devastating happen in their lives. We
yeah,
just may not be able to see it, or maybe it hasn't happened yet. But that weekend moved me forward. I left inspired to write down my story. I had no idea how hard that would be. But then
mm,
God placed a stirring in my heart to use my story to somehow help others. He used people, he used specifically women who were responding to his call to inspire me to do the same. And that is what I hope to do. But those women, I can't stress enough how much God used them in that time, in a time when I was at my lowest.
yeah. That's so good. And just to realize, for if you're someone who is ministering to, or someone who's in grief, maybe you're not the one, but you're someone who's ministering to someone in it. I love that. Yes, it's the being there for them, and that spiritual time, connection with the Lord and you and them. But I love the story about the practicalness of the man, helping to not only mow the lawn, but to teach your children, because that's something he was doing that your husband would have done, So I don't know. There's a lot of beauty to that, in how God used those different people to minister into your life. And there's so many different
Mhm.
ways that can look.
Yeah.
In my Bible study book that's coming out in July, it's called My Maker and Me, and it's a 6-week Bible study about becoming God's beautiful vessel. And the crux of the study is based on Isaiah 64:8 that said, God is our potter and we are the clay. And in it, we look at how the Lord intimately works with us, that he is continually with us. You've mentioned that already. He's presently and actively working in our lives, even when we face the most difficult trials and the hottest fires. And he purposed his presence and his work in us to be used to make us into beautiful vessels. And thinking about this in relation to grief, I thought about John 16 when Jesus prepared his disciples for the grief and mourning that they were about to face, knowing his crucifixion was just around the corner and knowing the sorrow that they would experience. In John 16:20, he said, most assuredly, I say to you that you will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice and you will be sorrowful, but your sorrow will be turned to joy. And then 2 verses later in verse 22, he said, therefore you now have sorrow, but I will see you again, and your heart will rejoice, and your joy no one will take from you. I love that promise of that joy, even in the midst of the grief and the pain. And then in John 16:33, Jesus said, these things I've spoken to you, that in me you have peace. In the world you'll have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. And just as you've already said, we cannot avoid sorrow and grief. I mean, I think we all would love to, but also you've already said the value of it is the growth and the what he does in you and creates something beautiful in you. And, there's a part of this life, of that sorrow and grief, but Jesus, who's the word made flesh, gave us plenty of promises and assurances that there's a day coming when Revelation 21:4 says God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. I will say, I cannot wait. But, I guess the question is then, how do you see that Jesus worked in your suffering to bring out something beautiful out of your pain? And how were those promises of his word helpful to you?
Someone once told me that she was glad God had given me a purpose for my pain. And I
Mm.
believe he did. And I've also learned that you can see beyond your pain to the goodness, peace, and purpose Jesus offers every day. I can say with the psalmist, you turn my wailing into dancing.
Mm.
You remove my sackcloth and clothe me with joy, that my heart may sing our praises and not be silent. Lord my God, I will praise you forever. Psalm 30:11-12. So that promise has come true for me. He has turned my world around because of Jesus. I mean, my life has been changed
Yeah.
over and over again through
Yeah.
every trial, everything that's happened. Because of Jesus, he has changed me. He has grown me. He has helped me to even be a help to other people.
Yeah. Which I think speaks so much of your story. In 2 Corinthians 1:3-4 says, blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in trouble with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. And, there's just nothing more beautiful and evident that Jesus worked in our pain when we start turning what we faced around and coming through as someone else's comfort. And that's what you've done. And I love it. It's a beautiful picture. I mean, you have a lot of grief that you faced, but in it, you have experienced God's comfort, and now you are sharing that comfort with everyone else. And I know there was a bunch of scriptures that we've kind of talked through, and even you've just shared some that you clung to that brought you healing, encouragement. Just anything else that you would want to share that would help our listeners find that hope and joy? Any other scriptures or anything else before we wrap up?
I do. I hope to share that comfort. And there were so many verses that he used to speak to me, especially while I was writing that book. But one of my favorite verses in the Bible, and this is not about grief, but it's John 10:10. I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. And, there's another one that I like, Psalm 16:11. You make known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand.
Mm-hmm.
And one more I'll just read is, I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your wonders of old. Psalm 77:11.
Mm. All those good memories that he gave you.
Yeah.
Mhm. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this. I did want to give everybody a chance to know how they can purchase your books. I think did you mention that you have one other book that you've written?
I have written it. It's in production right now.
Okay.
It should be out early next year, but it's called Ever Present, talking about God's presence being always with us. And it's
Awesome.
about not just my stories, but it's a collection of stories from other people of how God has either worked in their life or they realize His presence was with them, and it's their stories about that.
That's awesome. Well, tell us how someone could connect with you or purchase your books and.
Of course, and thank you so much, Pat, for having me on her podcast. This has been fun.
I've
But my
had fun.
website is patriciacameronwrites.com. You can connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or X at Faith Driven Joy. And books are available on Amazon and my website. I also have some signed paperback and hardback books in local bookstores and gift shops like Blessings, Revival Design and Consignment, Community Pharmacy, Trove. And also their audiobooks are available pretty much where Audible or audiobooks are available. So that's
Awesome.
much
Well,
it.
thank you so much, Patricia, for coming and being a part of this. Thank you to all of our listeners for being a part of her podcast today. We hope you found healing and encouragement for your real life today. And we hope it helps you helps minister to you through the Christmas season so that you can find that hope and joy even when grief grips your heart. Before we say goodbye, I do want to invite you to join me on your favorite social media platform, whether Facebook, Instagram, or Pinterest, to get biblical encouragement for Christian women. Check out my website, onfire-ministries.org, for biblical resources. I have a lot of free biblical resources and Bible studies available there. So if you found this podcast beneficial, please take a moment to rate, review, and share this podcast with others. Maybe it is the very thing that they need to hear to be encouraged in their faith journey today. And until we meet again, have a blessed and beautiful day.